Let me mention some other places where you get this old idea reoccurring. I think that in Jewish mysticism, the old fluidity idea occurs, but another place that it occurs, I think, is in early Christianity. And you may have heard me hinting in this direction previously. So when the New Testament talks about Jesus as being some sort of small-scale human manifestation of God, that's really, it sounds to Jews so utterly pagan, but what I'm suggesting is perhaps the radical idea for us Jews that in fact it's not so pagan. That in fact there was a monotheistic version of this that existed already in the Tanakh. And that the Christian idea that Jesus, or the Logos, the Word, as the Gospel of John describes it in its opening verses, that the presence of the Word or Jesus in fleshly form, in a human body on the planet Earth, is actually God making God self-accessible to humanity in a kind of avatar. This is what we were seeing in the J and the E texts. This is much less radical than it sounds. Or when the Gospel of John describes God's self as coming down upon and overlapping with Jesus, which is a famous passage early in the Gospel of John, that is actually a fairly old ancient Near Eastern idea of the reality or self of one deity overlapping with some other being. So this is not just Greek paganism sort of smushed onto a Jewish mold, which is the way a lot of Jews tend to think of Christianity. This is actually an old ancient Near Eastern idea, that is an old Semitic idea that is popping up again among those Jews who were the founders of Christianity. Even after the time of the New Testament, I think that we see this coming up in the doctrine, the post-New Testament doctrine of the Trinity. The Trinity really doesn't occur in the New Testament, but it occurs in early Christianity very soon afterwards. And we Jews have always tended to sort of make fun of the Trinity. Oh, how can there be three that is one? If they've got this three-part God, even if they call it a triune God, a God that is three yet one, really they're pagans. They're not real monotheists like we Jews are, or like the Muslims are. Those Christians are really pagan. But I think that what we're seeing from what I've been saying in the past couple days is that, the idea of the Trinity, that there is this one God who manifests itself in three different ways, that's actually an old ancient Near Eastern idea that can function in a polytheistic context, as it did for the Babylonians and the Canaanites, but it can also function in a monotheistic context, as it does, I think, in the J and the E texts and some of the other texts that we were looking at. In fact, to say that three is one, heck, the Kabbalah is going to go further than that. They say 10 is one. The Zohar, Sefer HaBahir, they say 10 is one. And actually, when you get to Luriana Kabbalah, and there's the idea that within each of the Sefirot, each of the 10 Sefirot has 10 Sefirot within it, so that we've got 100 different Sefirot, really. We're taking this reasoning much, much farther than the Christians did. So actually, one of the more radical conclusions that I came to, much to my own surprise, when I was writing this book, and this is not at all what I had intended to do, because in various ways that we could discuss if you're interested, I'm actually rather uncomfortable with my own conclusion here, but as a scholar, I got to call them as I see them. One of the conclusions that I came to my shock, when I finished this book, is that we Jews have no theological objection to the doctrine of the Trinity. We Jews for centuries have objected to the Trinity, have labeled it pagan, have said, well, that's clear. There you can see that the core of Christianity doesn't come out of the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh, what they call the Old Testament. Really, they're being disloyal to the monotheism of the Old Testament. Actually, I think that that's not true. To my surprise, I came to the conclusion, somewhat to my dismay, I came to the conclusion that we Jews have no theological right to object to the Trinity. Theologically, I think that the model of the Trinity is an old, ancient Near Eastern idea that shows up in the Tanakh, and that in a different way shows up in Jewish mysticism as well. There's plenty that we can disagree with. But it's not theological. Fundamentally, the theological model used by Christianity, I think, is one model that shows up in our own sacred literature, in the parts of the Tanakh, in the Zohar, in Jewish mysticism. I think furthermore that you can see, it's interesting if you read some of the church fathers or some Christian commentators on the story of Abraham and the three visitors, they make a linkage between that story and the doctrine of the Trinity. Those three visitors become a harbinger of, a hint at the later idea of the Trinity. For Augustine, much later on, for Luther, they connect Genesis 18, the three visitors, to their theology. And you know what? This is one of those cases of a much later writer saying something that seems very removed from the text, but actually at some very deep level they got the pshat. They're really correct that there is a linkage between the Trinity, the theological intuition that's behind the idea of the Trinity, and the theological intuition that is behind the story in Genesis 18.